Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling a really interesting question. Why is it that some psychedelic trips can feel like a total emotional breakdown before you get to any kind of breakthrough?
Yeah, it's this weird sort of paradox, right? Like you have to fall apart to put yourself back together, and we see it all the time throughout history, across cultures. It's fascinating.
So, to get to the bottom of this, we've got some really cool sources lined up.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to start way back with Aldous Huxley and his, wild ride with mescaline.
Yeah, his book, The Doors of Perception, classic.
Exactly. Then we'll jump to, the cutting edge, the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research.
Really interesting stuff they're doing there. And then to add even more, historical and scientific depth, we're going to look at Stanislav Grof's LSD research, especially his book, Realms of the Human Unconscious. It gets into all those deep levels of the mind.
Right, and how psychedelics can, unlock them.
Yeah, exactly. And then we'll look at Christopher Tinnerson's more recent work, too, on psychedelics and the brain, consciousness, even mental health. Really cutting edge.
Oh, and we can't forget the OG, right? Albert Hofmann and his book, LSD, My Problem Child. I mean, that's where it all started.
Yeah, his discovery of LSD, personal experiences, even interactions with Timothy Leary. Oh, and Huxley, too.
All connected.
It really is. So we're going to weave all this together, the personal stories, the groundbreaking research, the historical context.
To figure out what's going on during these tough psychedelic trips, what's happening in our brains and minds. And are these struggles, are they actually needed for healing and growth, like some people say?
Big questions.
Huge questions. Okay, so let's jump into Huxley's The Doors of Perception.
Okay.
He talks about this idea, this reducing valve, that our brain's basically filtering reality, toning it down, so we can function.
Yeah, it's like our brains are protecting us from being totally overwhelmed.
Right, by the full force of reality.
Right, but then Huxley said psychedelics, they might just turn that valve off, and then bang, you're experiencing the whole spectrum of consciousness.
Whoa, that's got to be intense.
Oh, it can be. Exhilarating and terrifying, sometimes both. It's like seeing the world in high def for the first time. And it can be too much.
Especially for the ego, right?
Right. Huxley calls this raw experience, he calls it encountering the suchness of reality.
The suchness?
Yeah, it's like a pure, unfiltered perception. And that can be really overwhelming for the ego, which is so used to filters and boundaries.
So our sense of self, our ego, it's built on these limits to what we perceive.
It seems that way. So when the limits are removed, even for a little while, it can feel like your whole world is falling apart. People talk about it like dying, like losing their identity, ego dissolution.
Wow. But is there actually any science to back this up?
That's where Stanislav Grof comes in. His research with LSD back in the 50s and 60s, it gave us a ton of data on how psychedelics affect us psychologically. He observed that LSD could unlock what he called realm of the human unconscious, bringing up all this deep emotional stuff, repressed memories, trauma, all of it.
So we're not just seeing the world differently, but we're also, confronting our own buried stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that confrontation is really painful. It can lead to those emotional breakdowns we're trying to understand.
Psychedelics are digging up way more than we expected.
Sometimes, yeah. And that's why set and setting are so important. Both Huxley and Hoffman, the guy who discovered LSD, they both said the environment you're in when you have a psychedelic experience, your mindset, how prepared you are, it all matters. A lot.
So it's not just about the drug, it's about creating a safe container for this potentially crazy experience.
Exactly. Hoffman actually called LSD his problem child because he saw how easily it could be misused, how it could lead to bad stuff, especially if people take it recreationally without any guidance or support.
Like all those stories about people having bad trips when they're not in the good setting?
Exactly. And those experiences, they can be really scary, even traumatizing. So Hoffman and a lot of researchers today, they emphasize how important it is to have a carefully controlled setting and experienced guides, people who can help if things get rough.
This is making a lot more sense. So if we're confronting all these deep emotions and traumas, is it possible that this breakdown we're talking about, is it actually part of healing?
That's what researchers like Christopher Timmerman are trying to figure out. His article on psychedelics, he talks about how intense your challenging experiences are during a psychedelic trip. They might actually be linked to how well the therapy works.
Hold on, so you're saying the harder the trip, the better the chance of healing.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but it's a really interesting idea that's coming out of the research. Maybe confronting those difficult emotions and traumas instead of avoiding them. Maybe that's the key to getting free from them.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So if these tough experiences are important for healing, how do we even begin to understand them? How do we go through them in a way that helps us grow and doesn't hurt us?
Really good question, and it's something we're going to dig into a lot more as we look at the work of Groff, Timmerman, and all the others who've been studying the therapeutic potential of psychedelics.
Right, because they're powerful, powerful substances. Okay, so to recap, we've talked about this idea of a reducing valve in their brains and how psychedelics might turn it off, which leads to, like, a flood of reality.
And maybe ego dissolution.
Right, and maybe all this deep emotional stuff coming up, stuff we might have buried for years.
And maybe, just maybe, those difficult experiences, they're actually part of the healing process.
It's a lot to think about. Stick with us. We're going to keep going deeper into the science and the personal stories behind these amazing and often confusing psychedelic journeys. Okay, so last we left off, we were talking about how psychedelics might, like, switch off our brain's reducing valve, right? And that leads to all this unfiltered reality flooding in. No wonder people feel overwhelmed sometimes, or like their sense of self is, like, dissolving. But, this whole idea that the breakdown could actually be the start of a breakthrough, that's what I find really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical concept, and modern science is actually starting to back it up. In fact, Christopher Timmerman, in his article on psychedelics, he talks about how these substances can, like, completely change how our brains communicate.
Oh, you mean how they seem to rewire our brains? I think I read about that somewhere.
Right, exactly. Timmerman, he explains that psychedelics can create this state of hyperconnectivity in the brain. So areas that normally don't talk to each other directly, they suddenly can.
So it's like creating new pathways, new connections in the brain.
Yeah, exactly. And it's this new connectivity that might explain why psychedelics can have such a profound impact on us, on our thinking, our emotions, even our sense of self. Like, imagine your brain suddenly being able to make all these new connections. It's going to change how you see the world, how you understand yourself.
Yeah, I could see that. But wouldn't that also explain why psychedelic experiences can be so intense? And sometimes even, like, disorienting. Like, our brains just aren't used to handling that much information all at once.
That's a really good point. It's like think of it like shaking up a snow globe, right? Everything's suddenly swirling around in new ways, and it takes a while for things to settle down. And until then, it can feel pretty chaotic, especially for a sense of self, which is usually so stable and predictable. This flood of new information and perspectives, it can be really destabilizing.
So is that what's happening during ego dissolution? Our brains just can't handle the overload, and our normal sense of self just kind of, like, breaks down.
That's one theory, yeah. And there's some brain imaging studies that kind of support it. They show that psychedelics change brain activity in the areas that deal with self-awareness and identity. So it seems like these substances can actually interrupt how the ego normally functions, and that lets us experience ourselves and the world in a totally different way.
Okay, so I'm starting to understand the neuroscience behind these challenging experiences a little better. But how does this all connect back to healing and transformation?
Well, as we talked about before, psychedelics can bring up all these deep emotions and traumas that we might have been suppressing, sometimes for years. And facing this stuff, it can be really painful. But it can also be a chance to heal and grow.
So it's like the psychedelics are helping us access those hidden wounds so we can actually start to deal with them.
Exactly. And this hyperconnectivity in the brain that we were just talking about, that might be a big part of it. By creating all these new pathways and connections, psychedelics might actually allow us to process and integrate these difficult experiences in a much deeper way.
This reminds me of Groff's work with LSD. Didn't he find that people who did LSD therapy often ended up reliving and working through traumatic experiences from their past?
Yeah, he did. And Groff, he believed that this process of reliving and re-experiencing trauma, he thought it was a crucial part of healing. It's like releasing the emotional energy that's trapped in those memories. And that can allow people to move on with a sense of freedom and wholeness.
This all sounds really intense, though, and maybe even kind of risky. How do we make sure that these challenging experiences actually lead to healing and not more harm.
That's where set and setting come back into play. Hoffman and Groff, they both said how important it is to have a safe and supportive environment for these psychedelic experiences. And to have a guide, someone skilled who can help people navigate all those difficult psychological landscapes that can come up.
So it's not just about taking a psychedelic and seeing what happens. There's real skill involved in guiding someone through these experiences in a way that helps them and doesn't hurt them.
Definitely. And this is where integration is super important. Timmerman, he really emphasizes that the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics, they don't just come from the experience itself. They come from how you process and integrate that experience into your everyday life.
It's not enough to just have a mind-blowing experience. You got to make sense of it, learn from it, and actually apply those insights to your life.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Integration is the key to turning these, challenging psychedelic experiences into real positive change.
So I guess journaling, meditation, even art therapy, things like that, those could all be helpful for integration.
Yeah, definitely. And therapy can be a really valuable resource too, to help you process the experience, understand it, and make lasting changes in your life.
So it's like psychedelics give you this glimpse of another reality, another way of being. But it's up to you to actually bring that vision into your life.
Yeah, it's a process, and it can be ongoing. It can even be lifelong. It's about staying open, curious, always learning and growing from these challenging but potentially transformative experiences.
This whole deep dive is really changing how I think about psychedelics. I used to think of them as party drugs, but now I'm seeing them as these powerful tools for healing, self-discovery, maybe even spiritual growth.
It's a shift in perspective for sure. And it's important to remember this whole field of research is still pretty new. We're just starting to understand how complex the psychedelic experience is and all its potential benefits.
But it's such an exciting time to be exploring all this research that's happening now. It's opening up these new ways to understand the mind, to treat mental illness, even to expand consciousness.
Yeah, it is exciting, and it's important to approach it all with both enthusiasm and caution, to learn from what's come before us, but also stay open to new discoveries and ideas.
It's kind of wild, right? This whole idea that, the tough parts of a psychedelic experience, the scary parts even, maybe those are actually the keys to healing and growing. It's not exactly what we're taught to think, we try to avoid discomfort, but what if leaning into it, obviously with the right support, what if that's actually the way forward?
Yeah, it's a pretty big shift in perspective. It really challenges how we normally think about healing. We usually focus on getting rid of symptoms, avoiding pain. But maybe real healing means facing those darker parts of ourselves, the traumas, the limiting beliefs, all that stuff we try to hide from.
It makes you wonder if those difficult experiences are trying to show us something, shake us up, make us see things differently.
I like that. That's a great way to put it. And it's something that a lot of people who have had these really profound psychedelic experiences, they talk about it. Even Albert Hoffman, the guy who discovered LSD, he said something similar. He knew about the risks, how LSD could be misused, but he also had this deep respect for its potential, to expand consciousness, to help people grow. He saw it as a powerful tool, but only if it was used responsibly and with intention.
He really emphasized set and setting, didn't he? The right environment, the right mindset. They're so important for having a good, meaningful experience.
Absolutely. Hoffman was all about preparation, understanding what the drug might do, but also cultivating a sense of trust and openness. And he was a big believer in having a guide, someone who could help if things got tough,
And Groff, with his research on LSD, he really showed how important that guide or therapist is to help people navigate all the intense emotions and memories that can come up during a psychedelic session.
Totally. Groff saw the therapist as essential, to help people process all that heavy stuff that might surface, and then to integrate those experiences into a bigger understanding of themselves and their lives.
So it's not like you just take a psychedelic and hope for the best. There's a real art to guiding someone through these experiences in a way that's helpful and safe.
Exactly, and that's where the integration process comes in. Like we were saying before, Timmerman's research shows how important it is to make sense of those challenging experiences, to find ways to use those insights in your everyday life.
So things like journaling, meditation, art therapy, anything like that, it could all be helpful for integration.
For sure. And therapy too. Talking to a therapist can be a really great way to process the experience, understand it better, and actually make changes in your life based on what you learned.
So it's like the psychedelics give you a glimpse of a different reality, a different way of being. But it's on you to like make that vision a part of your life.
Yeah, it's a process. It takes effort. It's not always easy, but it can be really rewarding. It's about staying open, being curious and always learning and growing from these experiences.
This whole conversation has really changed how I see psychedelics. I used to think they were, just for fun, but now I see them as these incredible tools for healing, for self-discovery, maybe even for something spiritual.
It's a powerful shift in perspective, and it's important to remember that this whole field of research, it's still pretty young. We're just scratching the surface of understanding these experiences and what they can do for us.
But it's such an exciting time to be a part of it. All this research that's happening, it's opening up all these new possibilities for understanding the mind, for treating mental illness, even for expanding our consciousness.
It really is, and it's important to approach it all with a sense of respect and a bit of caution too. To honor the knowledge that's come before, but also to be open to new discoveries and ideas.
You know what I find really interesting? How this whole approach to healing, like facing your shadows and all that, it's similar to some ancient spiritual traditions, like embracing your imperfections as part of some path to enlightenment.
It's true. It's like psychedelics are giving us a modern way to access those ancient mysteries, helping us remember something our ancestors maybe always knew, that the way to true wholeness, it's not about avoiding pain, it's about facing it, learning from it, and turning it into something beautiful and meaningful.
Makes you wonder if these challenging experiences, they're not just personal, maybe they're collective too. Like they reflect the challenges and opportunities we're all facing as a species, especially now.
That's a really interesting thought. Maybe psychedelics, when they're used responsibly and carefully, maybe they can actually help us navigate these crazy times, Give us new insights and perspectives that can lead us towards a more compassionate, more sustainable, more connected future.
This has been a truly mind-blowing deep dive. And it's clear that the conversation about psychedelics is just getting started. There's so much more to learn and discover.
Absolutely. And as always, we encourage you to check out the sources we talked about, do your own research, and approach these powerful substances with respect, with clear intentions, and a whole lot of curiosity.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep searching, keep questioning, and keep expanding your mind.